Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific. I'm Nancy McSherry Jensen. I'm the CEO of The Swing Shift. For today's final live Hangout Habit for 2020, we have Jenn Gile from F5 Networks, who's going to talk about 2 career transitions in 2 years. So that's a big get. Right now, I just want to let's see. Whoop! I am too fast on the draw this morning. Here at the Swing Shift, we've been running these programs since March, and we've developed a series of additional programming for you. We have accountability groups starting in January 2021. We'll kick off our 3rd accountability cohort. If you need a small group of people to help you move your career search forward, we're here for you. So you can go to the website and sign up. We have 2 workshops coming up on December 12th. And so that's in 3 weeks. Chelsea Cooper, who's a Pacific Northwest area women's career advocate, will be talking about interviews for the modern job search. Her background is incredibly robust. She's come up through the ranks at Starbucks and now at Amazon, and she's going to talk about the kinds of interview styles and ways to successfully move your search forward in that manner. We have video on demand workshops. We've got a wonderful offering with our partner from Blueprint Technology on LinkedIn and personal brand. And so that is available to you as well. And we're delighted to tell you that our book and e-course is now available for purchase. You can go to backtobusinessbook.com. And there's some pretty sweet deals on by doing a pre-order as well as getting the e-course. I think Sarah and I are, we're so excited about it. And at the same time, especially in the e-course, I just can't stand to see myself on video anymore. But I hope that you will and take a look. And we're very, very excited about those coming up. But today, we're talking with Jenn Gile. She started her career in the U.S. State Department, and she did training and learning and development for the Foreign Service. She then moved industries where she went from the government services to F5 Networks, where she started in a learning and development role. And recently, she has now moved into a product marketing role. So Jenn has moved industry and then role. And she's going to talk a little bit about how she did that this morning. Many of you and many people out there really want to make some hard left-hand turns in terms of saying, I want to work in a different industry. I want to do something different. Jenn did it, and she's going to talk about how to do it. So Jenn, good morning. I'm going to hand things over to you.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see some familiar names and faces. Hey, Joe. Hey, Jana. Hey, Azure. Again, my name is Jenn Gile. I am here to talk about my career journey, but I don't want it to be just about me. I also want to hear from you and your questions. So if at any time you have something to say, you can use the chat and I'll keep an eye on that. Or if I don't catch it right away and I don't stop, just feel free to unmute. You know, there's only a few of us on this call, and I'd rather have it be a conversation. And so, like Nancy said, I've gone through a lot of transition in the last couple of years. I am pushing 40 and just made 2 big changes in my life. And I went through a lot of grief and a lot of trouble, but I'm here to say that it was worth it. And I'm really happy doing what I'm doing. So the first transition I'm going to talk about was from government to technology. And to set the stage a little bit, I went into federal government immediately out of college. I was 24. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't get the job that I wanted. I really wanted to be a Foreign Service officer, but as I learned in adulthood, they're not looking for 24-year-old diplomats. And so I settled for passport services, which is somewhat adjacent in the State Department. And so for 13 years, I worked for the federal government. First, my job was to review passport applications. And so if you've ever applied for a passport, it's very possible I reviewed your application. And then I got good enough at it and bored enough with it that I decided I wanted to start teaching how to do it. And so I spent most of my career with Passport Services being a trainer, both for teaching citizenship law, but also leadership and management skills, as well as labor negotiations. I loved my job, but, because there's always a but, right? I kind of had grown with it as much as I could. It got my husband and I through some hard times. My husband got laid off during the 2008 recession. He worked at Washington Mutual, rest in peace. And I had to be responsible for our income. Then we had a baby and my husband stayed home and was a stay-at-home dad. And again, I had to make sure that we had a reliable income stream. And so I stayed with the government, frankly, longer than I wanted to. And when we decided that it was time for me to start making that transition to something else, I realized I had neglected something really important, and that was my network. I didn't know, I mean, I had plenty of friends who didn't work in the government, but I didn't know anyone outside the government who did the kind of work that I did. I didn't know any other trainers. You know, my friends had really cool, amazing careers, and they would try to connect me, but they didn't know anything about what I did. And so what was the challenge? People think government employees are, let's hear it. I've heard it all. What do you think I was up against? Unmute, use the chat.
Bureaucratic.
Bureaucratic.
Slow and lazy.
Slow and lazy. What else? If I
Inefficient.
Incompetent.
Inefficient.
Yeah, I've heard it all. Unable to change, in the job because you can't do anything else. The list goes on. And what I was not prepared for when I wanted to make the transition into technology is that I was possibly moving from industry to industry that could not be more different. If I had been interested in an industry that perhaps was a little closer to the federal government in terms of the types of work that we did, exactly, Joe, academia, healthcare. There are a lot of industries that have the same reputation as government employees. I was not prepared to be discriminated against. And it broke my heart. It blew my mind. I had people tell me they would never hire a government employee. They didn't think a government employee could do a job. I went on an interview where I made it all the way through loops. I talked with everyone and I got to the end, not ambitious, yeah. I got to the end, everyone loved me, but one person who said, well, she's never fired anyone because they can't do that in the government, so she can't do this job. And I had this moment of, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't have the experience. Maybe I'm reaching too far. And I ended up hiring a career advisor, and she really helped me change that negative self-talk. But the thing that she was especially helpful with was helping me focus on my network, because you've heard it before, it's who you know, it's not necessarily what you can do. And so I devised an internal network strategy, external networking, sorry. External networking strategy, because I didn't need to know anybody else in the government. They weren't going to help me with my career change. I needed to meet people who were outside my industry. And so I looked at two different types of connections that I needed to make: personal or one-on-one connections and community connections. And so I'll talk a little bit about the personal ones first. Actually, you know what? I'm going to talk about the community ones first, because this is where people usually go when they're looking to expand their network. And so what I started doing was combing Meetup and Eventbrite and looking for local events that were geared towards technology or learning and development. You know, I thought I could go to these events, I could learn something, I'd meet people who are maybe hiring. What do you think the problem was with going to those events? Has anyone been to these?
I have. It's very
Nancy, what's
hard.
it like?
It's unless you are incredibly focused and outgoing, it's very intimidating because you're walking in, you don't know anybody, and what do you have to talk about? And when somebody says, "Why are you here?" It's you're very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. It's really putting yourself out there, even if you are outgoing. What else?
And you meet lots of
Joe.
You meet lots of people who are also looking for jobs and not necessarily the people who are hiring for
You
jobs.
hit it on the nose. I would say 90% of people there are also looking for jobs. And so while it was definitely worth my time in terms of getting to know the community better, getting to know what people were looking for in terms of employees and workplaces, everyone I met was in the same situation as me. So while I say that isn't the most effective route, it's still one that you want to look at. And you can still do it today. They're doing virtual events. The other thing that I did right away at the beginning was I joined an app called Shaper. And I can't even remember how I heard about Shaper. I think it had just come out at the time. It might have been my career coach that suggested it. Shaper is like a dating app for people who are looking to network. And so you get matched up with people based on a profile that you set up. And if you both, swipe, I don't know which way you're supposed to swipe, left. If you both swipe the same direction and you say you
Swipe right.
Swipe right? Okay, see, I don't know. I haven't dated in a very long time. If you both swipe the same direction, then you get connected on the app and then you can meet. And so, Nancy, what you said about the events being this really high risk place where it's like, oh my gosh, I have to put myself out there. I'm in person, because these were, of course, in-person events. And there's just this high anxiety that goes along with those. I didn't feel that with Shaper because both people want to meet. You kind of have an idea of what to expect in advance, and you start the conversation on the app. And so you can do some messaging, decide if you want to meet this person. I met a lot of really cool people through Shaper. It didn't end up being the, strategy that won me my job, but it helped me gain confidence in networking in a way that those in-person events just were more challenging. I'm not the most extroverted person, even though I come across as talkative and everything. It's a lot for me to put myself out there. And so I really like Shaper for that purpose. The next, did I talk over someone? No. So the next thing I did, because Shaper was working, but I wasn't meeting a lot of people in my industry. And when I say industry, I mean learning and development. I really wanted to meet other learning and development professionals to find out how did they get where they were? What advice do they have for me? Do they have any job leads? Can they think of anything that I could be doing differently with my job search? And so this is where I started leveraging LinkedIn. And I did something that I wasn't sure if it was a good idea or not, if it was going to pan out, but I started sending connection requests to anybody in the Seattle region with a job title that looked interesting, working in a company or an area that I was interested in. I probably sent 500 connection requests in a week, and I would just wait for these things to come back. And as soon as someone would accept my request, I would send them a private message and I would say, hey, Nancy, thank you so much for connecting. The reason that I wanted to connect with you is your background sounds really interesting. I'm trying to make this transition from government to technology or to the private sector, because at that point I was ready to lower my bar and say, I'll take anything. I just want to make a change. Would you be willing to spend some time with me and talk about how you got where you were? And so I don't know how many, I'm calling them LinkedIn dates. I went on a lot of LinkedIn dates. They were mostly coffee dates, mostly in person, but I also had plenty of phone interviews. They were usually anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour long. I met with people in a range of positions, from everything from like the Gates Foundation and PATH because I was kind of interested in that nonprofit sphere, to Zillow and Amazon, Starbucks, huge range of people. And what started as a really scary experiment of putting myself out there and begging these people to meet with me ended up being the most empowering experience I had the entire time. The number of people who were willing to take 30 to 60 minutes out of their day to talk to me blew my mind. And it gave me hope that, yes, there is a place out there for me. I'm meeting amazing people. We're having good conversations. I would follow up and thank them and stay in touch with them. And, you know, you never know what's going to happen out of those relationships. At the same time, I also joined the Association for Talent Development, which is how I met Azure. She's on the line today, because I wanted to do more than just meet people in the learning and development community. I wanted to work with them. I wanted to have an opportunity to grow together, because I find that, you know, in all of my job changes I've had, even though I was with the government a long time and went through a lot of jobs, it was always the reputation that I had that helped me get a job. And so I knew that if I went and I worked hard and could show that I knew what I was doing and that I was skilled, that would open additional doors for me. And it did. And so I spent about a year and a half volunteering with ATD Puget Sound, creating events, meeting people, growing my network. That's how I worked with Sarah and Nancy about a year ago. And it's continued to be a great source of where I've met people. And so I would say of these 4 methods, I think all 4 were valuable. The 2 that ended up being the highest value for me were LinkedIn and ATD Puget Sound. And so I would say it's that combination of finding personal relationships as well as a community that you fit into, whether it's, you know, learning and development for my area of expertise, or if you're in HR or product marketing. There are lots of professional organizations out there, and I think their online presence has really grown this year and made it easier to find them. And so before we kind of jump into my next career transition, I'll say one of those LinkedIn conversations, which actually was a phone conversation, led to me being introduced personally to someone who was hiring at F5. And that certainly didn't get me the job, but it did get me in the door. And I ended up getting hired, and I ended up working at F5 in the learning and development field, and I loved it. And so I'm going to take a pause because I know I've talked a lot, and I want to see if you have any questions about any of these external networking methods or anything that I went through. Sarah.
Jen, I have a question. So when you were going on all of these meetings, how would you prepare for them? Would you prepare differently depending on who you were talking with? Was there like some, you know, the top 3 things you did before you met with someone? Can you walk through that?
Yeah. So on the low end of it, the kind of the, you know, easiest thing is I would always look at their profile. So if I met them on Shaper, I'd, you know, find them on LinkedIn. I'd look at their history, you know, see what they've done, to kind of have that fresh in my mind for what their career journey was, so that I would know, you know, oh, you know, you've only been here for 6 months, or you've been here for 5 years, you know, kind of be able to ask some questions around that. I would research the organization that they worked for to make sure that I had an understanding of, you know, what the organization did or the company did, broadly speaking, where they might fit in, so that I could also ask, you know, questions like, how does what you do impact the company that you work for or the nonprofit that you work for? And then as I would build and do more of these, I would bring in things that I had learned from previous conversations into future conversations. I would say maybe 20 to 30 minutes of prep per one-on-one informational interview.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure thing. Any other questions? Okay. So that was my external networking strategy. The second transition that I went through was from learning and development to product marketing. And so I had spent 8 to 10 years in the learning and development field. And I got to the point, even though I loved my team and what I was doing, that it wasn't hard for me anymore. And I kind of hit that moment that I didn't think I would ever get there. I saw myself eventually maybe being a chief learning officer or leading a huge training department. But I got to that point where I said, this isn't exciting me anymore. Uh-oh, what do I do? I did not just jump straight into product marketing. It actually took a while for me to get there. It was a different type of transition. I made a really conscious effort. When I had this aha moment, I said, okay, what's going to be easier? Moving both company and job type, or moving just job type? Well, staying in the company that I was in and changing job types was the easier thing to do. And it was the right decision because, as I said, I really liked working at F5. I liked where the company was going. I liked the people. It was a workplace that I wanted to be in. I just didn't want to do the job I was doing. And so, unfortunately, I didn't know what I wanted to do next. So the challenge is I knew I wanted to stay there. I didn't know where I wanted to go. So I did a lot of reflection and research. The first thing that I started with, and this is again kind of that homework mentality, was what is it that I like about my job now? Even if the work goes away, what are the things that makes me excited? I like helping people. I like improving team performance so that teams can work better. I really love figuring out problems. Impacting the company's success is something that's really important to me. I like being able to feel like my work has value and an impact. I like to be creative. And perhaps most importantly for me, I really like to own the results of my work. I don't want to just execute somebody else's work or ideas, but I really want a chance to own that stuff. So I kind of made this list, and then I said, okay, these are things that I could probably do in lots of different jobs. They're not unique to learning and development. I'm sure everyone on this call has done these things regardless of what industry you've been in. And so the next thing I did was I started looking through our internal job postings and saying, what are the F5 jobs that I could do? And I made a list of the ones that I thought I could do and that sounded interesting to me. I have a pretty good project management and agile background. And so I said, well, I could probably be a Scrum Master or an agile coach. That takes a lot of those skills that I like and I'm good at. I already am a certified project manager, so I could be a project manager somewhere at F5. I don't know what kind of projects I could manage, but I could manage them. I could be a program manager, which is similar. I was already a learning and development program manager, and so it would be, again, in some other area. Or I could look into product management because I was looking at, I'm in a tech company. What's a role that's growing? What's there a lot of? Oh, there's a lot of product managers here. So I made that list. And then I said, okay, well, I don't necessarily know a lot about all of these jobs. So I need to learn more so I can narrow my search. So I started doing very similar things to what I did when I would go on these one-on-one interviews. Is I would read web articles about the jobs, try to figure out what does a career path look like, what kind of skills do these jobs need. I would go through job postings at other companies, not because I was interested in applying at other companies, but I wanted to see what kind of skills were they looking for, how are these roles described. I watched a lot of YouTube videos, and I took advantage of LinkedIn Learning, which is a resource that my company pays for, so that I could do some little basic 101 training in these areas to see, what can I learn and what do I find interesting. So this probably took me maybe a month to start really honing in on what interested me most. So after I did that, here's where the networking part comes in. I did searches within my company for people with job titles that matched what I was interested in doing. So, if I was really interested in being a Scrum Master, so I went and found Scrum Masters. A lot of companies have different ways that you can search, whether you have a hierarchy or an org chart. We have a Microsoft product that lets you search by job title. And so I looked for people in these jobs. At the same time, I also leveraged my network. I'd been at F5 long enough and I was working in human resources. The great thing about HR is HR knows people all over the company. And so I started using those HR connections to say, hey, who can you introduce me to that's doing this job or manages this thing? And so what I would do is I would try to meet with at least 2 to 3 people with each job title, because not only did I want to expand my network within F5 and get to know these non-HR roles, but I also wanted to get different perspectives on each job. And like I said earlier, I started to really think, oh, I could be a Scrum Master. But as I started talking to these people, I realized, you know what? It doesn't have the broad cross-functional impact that I really like. It's really focused on 1 or 2 teams. I don't think I'd be happy. And so scratch that one. I did that for, again, probably a couple months. And then I picked a job track that I wanted to pursue. I decided that I really wanted to be in product management, not product marketing, product management. And so I went back to my manager and I said, here's what I'm really interested in doing. Can I go on a rotation somewhere else in the company with no promise that I'll come back? And the only reason I was able to make that ask is because I felt really well connected with my leader, that I could be honest with her about what my interests were and where I was, feeling like I needed to make a change. And she knew that I was ready to move on. She didn't want me to leave the company. We had to do a little bit of internal HR conversations, and I'll give credit to one of the other leaders in our organization, because my manager wasn't quite sure if she could let me go for 3 months. And this other person said, we do it all the time for people on maternity and paternity leave. We can make it work for this. And to this day, that's the best thing that anyone has ever done for me, is say, this is just as important as a family transition. We're going to make this happen. But they didn't go a step further and get it for me, right? I had to go out and decide, where is it that I want to do this rotation? And so as I had been building my network and talking to these people, one of the people that I had met was a director of product management in one of our other product groups. And I went to him and we had another meeting. And I didn't tell him in advance what I wanted, but we had a really good conversation and we were hitting it off really well. And I made the ask. And he said yes. And so what I didn't realize, because I had told him I was interested in product management, I didn't realize that he was setting me up with a rotation in product marketing. I didn't know what product marketing was. I started the rotation and kind of figured it out. I had a product marketing director that I worked with in what's called the Nginx product group, and I ended up loving it. He figured out from the conversation with me that even though I said I was interested in product management, based on everything that I said to him, this product marketing job could actually make me really happy and be a great fit for me. And he was right. I spent 3 months in this rotation, and I was fortunate enough that the group that I was working in was having some roles open. And so I got connected with the right people. I applied and I was brought on full-time in January of this year. And so it's November. I'm almost a year into this new product marketing career. And it all happened because I talked to people at the company and got to know them, and they got to know me well enough to have an idea of where I would fit really well. And I got an opportunity to establish that I could do a different job. And, there's kind of nothing better when you go into a job interview, having already said, I can do this job that you'd be hiring me to do, and people know I can do it. It was a big risk because I didn't know going in if there would be a job on the other end. There was the very real possibility that after that 3 months, I'd go back to my learning and development job and then be like, well, I'm back here now. What am I going to do? Am I going to stay here? Am I going to go somewhere else? What if I hate this product marketing thing? So I'll say it was probably, 1 part luck, 2 parts hard work that got me to where I am in this new job today.
Jenn, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a big ask that you made. It went around the usual conventions that, and F5 is a big company, but it went around their usual hiring conventions. So this was, relatively speaking, a risky move. I loved that you were able to tie it to, hey, we do this for maternity leave. Has there been any follow-on in terms of them extending this to other people?
They've been looking at it. Now that I'm not working in HR, I can't speak to, what exactly they're doing, but it's definitely something that a lot of large companies do have official rotation programs. I know that HR has actually been bringing people into HR to help out with work. And so that's starting to become like more of a volunteer program of, we've got this extra work that we need help with. These are the skills, who might be able to come over and help a little bit. In terms of what I did, yeah, it was a big risky ask. And I felt like the risk was not just worth it for my own career, but I had gotten to know the company well enough to say, you know what, they're not going to penalize me for making this ask. The worst they can do is say no. They're not going to fire me. It's not going to tank my career. Right. And, I wouldn't have made that ask 1 month into the job. That would have been a bad idea. But I'd been there long enough to, establish relationships and establish that, I can still stay in HR if that's, their decision.
I think the reason I'm asking is, I think for several folks who are maybe thinking, as they think about, well, how am I going to get back, or how am I going to switch? If you're looking to get back, I mean, it sounds like you could use this as a strategy to go get in using a skill that you currently have. And then after a set amount of time, propose this as a pivot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that is a really solid strategy. I think it is very, very hard to make a job type change when you're not already at a company, unless you've got some kind of way to demonstrate that you can do that job already. And so, for example, coming in as a learning and development expert, my expertise was never in question. And so I didn't have to establish that. I would say some companies have set policies already in place on how long you have to be in a job before you can move into another one or do a rotation. Some companies don't have that. I think 1 year is a good rule of thumb. A year feels like a long time, but that's a traditional performance cycle, and it's going to give you the opportunity to kind of get that good performance record before you make an ask to go do something else. They're going to be much more likely to say yes to that when you have a good track record with them. And especially if you've been building relationships during that time.
Right. And I think that this is something to consider if you've worked with an individual or with an organization before, and you're looking to change role. You can certainly go in with your past competency as a way to get in the door with an eye toward, this is a lily pad approach, right? Where you get in, do a really good job at what you know, and then jump to the next thing. And I know right now, the last year has felt long, but a year isn't that long in the big scheme of things.
Yeah, it's not that long to spend a year in a job. And what's, often I ask myself, what's the worst thing that could happen? I don't like it. Then I go get another job. My dad had the most annoying adage when I was in high school and college of, it's always easier to get a job when you have a job. He's right about that, in that it's easier to make a big job change when you already have some place to start from. I
My
think
mother said the same thing.
it's so annoying when they're right.
I know.
Don't tell them. Okay. I know this is being recorded, but like, don't tell them. So that's my journey. If there are any other questions, or if you want to open it up, I know we've gone a little bit over the normal half hour.
Jen, I also have another question. So throughout all of your networking, you know, you mentioned the word luck, a little bit of luck sprinkled in there. I like to call it more timing, hitting the timing right with people. And how much of timing do you think helped play a role? Like, would people just, their schedules were, you know, it worked out where they had 30 minutes to talk to you, where they, you know, do you feel like that played a pretty big role, that there was a product marketing for this new product, you know, all of that? I like to say that because
you're
when
right.
people
It's
say
not
no,
yeah.
Yeah. And like when people say no to you, they're not saying no to you personally. It's just the timing isn't right for them. And that's okay.
Yeah, you know, for every person who said yes to talking to me, there were a lot of people who never responded. And the few who did respond with a no, it was always, I'm sorry, I'm really swamped right now. And so I think in part the LinkedIn strategy worked because of sheer volume. You know, I'm not going to rely on the timing being right for one person. I'm gonna message 10 people, and if one person responds, that's a win. That one person might be the person who's able to make, you know, the next connection for me. Absolutely.
And yes, and a couple of things that have come in on the chat. Elta, and I think you're right. It's not no forever. It's just no for right now. And then Joe said she wants to put a plug in for being kind and consistent, because, you know, you can make great connections that way. Somebody who's swamped right now may have more ease in the spring. You know,
Yeah,
and
being flexible is really helpful.
Yep.
And, you know, having something to offer is also really helpful.
Yes.
If there is something that you have to offer, you know, rather than it be, hey, nice to meet you, can you refer me for a job? You know, it's having both some patience to not ask that refer me for a job until there's a, you know, relationship in place. But it's also, you know, is there a nonprofit that you suggest I work with? Are there, like, there are a lot of referrals that you can ask for that are not a job referral. I got so many good new connections by people who didn't have a job for me, but they knew people that I should talk to.
Right. I think that's good to remember.
Okay, I have another question about when you prepared. So you talked a little bit about, you know, researching the company, the person, but what about for you personally? Like, did you practice, we like to call it like a pitch. Did you have a pitch that you practiced talking about yourself, you know, very concise, in a concise way of what skills you have to contribute? Did that evolve as you were networking and as you were starting to understand where you wanted to go next? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
My pitch was mainly around why I wanted to leave my current job and why I wanted to make an industry change. And so it was something to the effect of, I like to work quickly and do hard things. And I want to be in not just a job, but an industry where that is valued. And that is why I identified technology as where I wanted to work. I wanted to work at a company where the status quo was reject the status quo. And that was a big part of how I would introduce myself to new connections when I would meet them. I wouldn't talk about my skills as much. It would more come out in the conversations that we would have and the questions that I would ask, where that would give me an opportunity to demonstrate that I understood what this person did. I understood the principles of learning and development, to be able to have those broader, I'll say like thought leadership level conversations, because some of the people I met with were in, directors and VPs of learning. That's a different type of conversation than someone who's developing training. And so it would be kind of having that mindset going in of, am I going to be having a technical conversation here of how do you develop training, or am I going to, know your audience. Am I going to have a thought leadership conversation with these people? But I found establishing early what kind of person I was really important.
That's awesome. Thank you. And very consistent with what,
Yes.
We like to get lots of different types of people on our hangouts from different roles, different backgrounds. And that is definitely a through line, know your
Right.
values.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great jumping off point. And sometimes it can take a little bit of work to figure all of that out. But your slide on the reflection piece is a really great starting point.
Yeah, I'll make a plug for the work that you do. I think without a career advisor, gosh, I don't know if I would have figured it out. I had
It's
a lot
lot
of
of
people telling
work.
me I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just need a third party, right, to tell you even sometimes things that you already know.
Yeah, my career coach told me things I knew and told me things that I didn't expect someone outside of the government to value in me. She saw value.
That's amazing. It's great that you sought that out too, because I think that's one thing that people don't realize, that how much help those resources can be.
They are, yeah.
It's really true. And Jen, I love that you talk about, I got a lot of no's.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would look at you from the outside and say, wow, this woman has had this straight line trajectory career, right? And she had this incredibly interesting gig at the State Department. And then she switched to technology. And then she switched again to marketing. Wow, she just must have applied and gotten the job. And I think it's refreshing to hear you talk about the challenges.
Yeah, it took about 2 years to make the change to technology. And that was after maybe a year of, submitting my resume everywhere.
Right.
It's a black hole.
It is. It is.
That's another conversation.
Well, and we can talk about that in the winter or the springtime, because you're right. And I mean, so much of what you're saying resonates, as Sarah said, with what we're talking about at the Swing Shift, right? You have to have a plan.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make sure it's aligned with your values. You have to be realistic about the timeline. And and in your case, you kept the lights on by doing the job you had. For many people, going and getting a job that isn't quite right, or maybe it's only a third of what you really want to be doing, but at least gets your foot in the door, because your dad and my mom, sadly, are right.
Yep.
That when someone says, "Oh, you're working," even if it's not 100% match, it imparts a notion of employability.
And you just
Unfairly,
don't know what the job's going to be, right?
Right.
You never know what you're going to get out of it. And I love being surprised. I've been surprised in every job that I've had.
Yep.
Every job has given me skills and connections that I didn't have before. Even the ones that I did not care for, I still learned from them.
Right. I'd assert, and again, a conversation for another day, I assert you learn more from things that you don't like as much or are harder for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you succeed at something, you go, "Oh, look at me, I'm so smart." And I think it's the ones where you have to really dig in and persevere and sometimes make the best of a suboptimal situation, where you learn the most about yourself and your skills, and about how to work with other people.
What I didn't say before, when I made the list of things I liked doing, I also made a list of things I do not like to do. And I said, my next job, I will not do these things, or they won't have these characteristics.
We advise this as part of our curriculum and program, because it's just as important to say, I want to do this and I do not want to do this, and being clear, because you recognize those things when you go in to talk to people. For me, for instance, I don't like adversarial environments.
Oh yeah.
don't care for them. And I've worked there and I've worked successfully there, but I don't like it. And so that is something I steer away from, you know?
Yes. And I
And, you know,
think going into something that you don't like, the hill is
right,
steeper, right?
that's right.
And you're less likely to do a good job if down inside you hate it.
Yep. And I think what you're teasing out, and so I'll make it a little more explicit, be clear about what it is that you want to stay away from. Is it a behavioral style?
Mm-hmm.
Is it compliancy issue? Is it an industry value? Right. Doing that reflection. And what we find is when you look back, you see the common elements.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, both on the positive and on the negative.
Yeah. Sarah, I see your comment about sometimes it's easier to start with what you don't like. That's how I decide what I want for dinner, and it makes my husband crazy. But the best thing that I did when I was making a career change a few years ago was I made what's called a love-loathe list. And so I carried around a piece of paper with me for a couple weeks. And every time I did something that made me so happy, I would write it under the love side. And every time I did something that made me crazy, I would write it under the loathe side. And, it didn't tell me anything I didn't already know, but it was like, oh yeah, I really need to not do this in my next job. This is making me crazy. I don't like holding other people accountable that don't want to be held accountable. I'm not going to put myself in that situation.
That having that
rules as well. Anything you're doing, there's something inside you that's going to come through, whether it's good or bad.
Jenn, I absolutely agree 100%. And I think we've all got them. Do you have any final thoughts for us before we log off for the day?
Yeah, my final thought, and I think we've danced around it a little bit, is the one thing that we haven't talked about is the importance of having a community or a tribe, whatever you want to call it, where no matter how bad things are, they're going to come back and say, you are amazing. You deserve this. You will get this. Here's a glass of wine.
Right.
I couldn't have gotten through this without my husband, without my friends, without my son. And so I think being vulnerable with people who you can trust and finding those people you can trust is what's going to give you the ability to persist and get to where you want to be.
Right. Right. And I would say that's, and Sarah saying in the chat, you're teeing up our accountability programs. Because, we have, and for folks here, and I think we've gone way past the time we've asked you to come and talk. We have, our accountability program that's coming up in January. We'll kick off our third. We have our community page and community groups, and you can find those supports out there. And, and as Jenn says, there's many ways to do this. And so we have those supports here for you. And so make sure to look into them. Jenn, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. I always love hearing what you have to say. And maybe it's because you reinforce what Sarah and I believe in terms of, getting back and switching gears, but we really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for having me anytime.
You bet.
All right.
You bet. For everybody else, we'll be going video on demand, but we're not stopping Hangout Habits. We've got Corinne Olson from Remitly, who's going to talk about her shifts, as well as Keita Williams, the success bully. Sorry, I was reading all day yesterday and my mouth is still not working. So check back every Thursday at 10 a.m. We'll be dropping new interviews and conversations. And to have one-on-one chats, go to the community page and check out our other programs. Thank you so much for coming.
Have a great one, everyone.
Okay, bye. I know we're doing the Zoom wave. Bye.